This week, the staff went out for lunch. We haven't been able to do that in quite some time, and so I invited the staff to go out. And I asked them, because I'm not a great conversationalist when I eat, at least that's what my wife tells me, I prepared some questions ahead of time, and I asked them what their childhood Christmas traditions were. And I told them about mine as a child. And anytime I share things about my childhood, if my parents are listening, which they may be this morning, I will undoubtedly get corrected. But what I remember about Christmas mornings is that we were allowed to wake up whenever we woke up. We were allowed to go and find our stockings and to look inside of our stockings at what was in there, candy and things like that. But there were undoubtedly some wrapped gifts in our stocking, and there were, of course, gifts under the tree, and we could not touch those gifts until my parents were awake and we had had breakfast. And we were not allowed to wake my parents up. My father, as a United Methodist pastor, had had a long day beforehand, and he wanted to rest, I think. And so we often, the three of us, would be awake and just had to sit and wait. I have no doubt that while we did not intentionally wake up my parents, there were times when the noise of three children waiting was probably enough to wake them up. But regardless, we had to wait. And as Beth so perfectly said during children's time, kids know about waiting at Christmas. And all of us do, to some extent. We may be waiting to open presents, or we may be waiting for someone to open a gift that we're really excited to see their reaction about. Or we may be waiting for any number of other reasons. No matter what, this is a time of year when we are required to have patience. And so we have been talking all throughout Advent about this question, what gifts do you bring? And we've talked about the gifts of peace, gentleness, faithfulness, and today, finally, patience. And patience is hard. In fact, just as I stood, as Bob lit the Advent candle, and as Janine read Scripture, I found myself thinking about this sermon and thinking, there are times when I feel ready to preach something to people because I think I do pretty well at that. And there are other times when I get up on a Sunday morning and think, why has God called me to preach this? It's not like I can teach anyone anything about this, and I reflected on my lack of patience. This morning, getting a 2-year-old ready, her mother needing to get out the door with her, I lacked patience. And even during this worship service, as children were getting items from underneath the tree to put in the creche, I was ready to move on, and I lacked patience. So I find myself standing here this morning thinking, how do I preach on patience? Patience is hard. We want everything immediately. We want faster internet, fast food. We want there to be no lines. We have a preference right now in our culture for self-checkout because we figure we can do it faster than that other person. Guess what? It's usually not true. But that's where our minds go. That's what we like to think. It's not that we're unfamiliar with patience, because some things are slow. Again, as Beth pointed out, right now we may be finding lots of lines. We've had to learn patience in the midst of a pandemic, or at least some of us have tried to learn patience. I know that hasn't worked for everyone. We have our fair share of people who have said we just need to get back to life and do things, and have lacked the patience to know that this is going to continue for a little while. This year, if you have shipped anything through the United States Postal Service, you have learned about patience as they seem to be struggling to deliver things in a timely manner. And in fact, we all heard about the supply chain issues this year. And while I don't believe, as I've seen many people post, that that is going to ruin Christmas in any way, shape, or form, it has made Christmas more of a waiting affair. It doesn't make Christmas even a patience issue. My birthday last February, or February of this year, so 10 months ago almost, I received a bike for Christmas that I have yet to see because of supply chain issues. We are not normally, naturally designed for patience, I don't think. In fact, what we're told is that we as humans are built to have fight or flight responses, but all of that is an immediate thing. It's triggered to either fight immediately or run away immediately. What we don't have is wait and see responses built into our brain, and so we are just naturally impatient. We are meant to react, and it is what we tend to do. We don't like to wait. In fact, we dislike it so much that we often try to find ways to work around waiting. I have a colleague who has a little son who's 3 years old, just a little bit older than Maxine. And he's getting old enough to realize there are presents under the tree and that some of those presents are for him. And she was telling me about how this year in particular, he saw one present that had his name on it. And he said, "I want to open it now." And his mom said, "No, you wait until Christmas. That's what we do." And he tried to find his way around that waiting. He said, "What if we open it now and then rewrap it up, and I will open it again on Christmas?" She said, "That's not how it works." But you got to give him credit for trying to find a way around waiting. As people of faith, we do really need to learn patience, because patience is how God acts. It is out of God's great abundance of patience that humanity even exists to this day. He has given us time and again one more chance. God is always patient with us. And so it is indeed one of the gifts that we receive from God and that we can share with the world. But how do we learn to be patient when we struggle? And I don't even know that it's naturally built into our brains. I think that it is something that we truly have to develop. Well, we read the story of the wise men today, and I think we can look to the wise men because they are people who patiently watch the skies looking for signs, specifically in the stars. And we're told that they finally see a star that they've been waiting for, and they follow it, and they travel. And imagine how patient they have to be, because stars tend to only show up at night, which means that they have to change their natural rhythms unless they were naturally night owls, but I don't think so. They had to learn to travel at night and wait during the day. And as Beth pointed out, most biblical scholars believe that they travel for upwards of 2 years. The reason being, in case you don't understand, is that Herod eventually declares that all children 2 years and younger should be killed. That means that at some point, Herod was told that this star appeared somewhere around 2 years ago, right? And it means that they traveled a very long way, potentially up to 2 years, if we're assuming that when they saw the star, they packed up and left, even if they took a few months to prepare and got going on their journey. Jesus is still close to 2 years old. We have this image of the wise men arriving because we have so many nativity scenes, and it does make for a clean picture for Christmas Eve. But we also have other biblical evidence that things have changed, right? In Matthew, if you listen closely, as Janine read it today, what it says is that when the wise men arrived at their house, so remember, Jesus is born in a manger, but evidently by the time the wise men arrived, they have moved into more permanent dwelling. And so again, it suggests that Jesus is older than birth age, which is what we tend to picture in the Nativity. Can you imagine being both so patient to wait for the sign and then knowing that once you see this sign, you have a journey ahead of you, but you don't know exactly how long it is. You just have to follow that star until it finally stops and rests over a certain place, and then you have found that you have been traveling at night for almost 2 years? We can certainly look to the wise men to learn patience. And first and foremost, I think what we can learn about patience is that to be patient, we have to first have our goal in mind. There was a president, and I forgot to write it down, but he famously said, you can only wait patiently if you know what you're waiting for, right? Otherwise, you're just sort of sitting there. But we develop patience by having a goal in mind. And the wise men clearly have a goal. It is this new king that they've been waiting to see born, and when that star appears, they say, we want to go see this new king of the Jews, and so they take off on their journey. We always will lack patience if we don't know what we're waiting for. But as people of faith, we know what we are waiting for. Christmas is almost here. We have been waiting, and we know what the goal is. It is the goal of peace and love and salvation, and Jesus is all of these things and more. Knowing that Jesus is the ultimate goal is still the best way for us to learn patience. And of course, we wait not only for Christmas Day when we can celebrate Jesus' birth, but we do wait for the consummation of the kingdom of heaven, what we call the second coming of Christ. And we really learn patience with this goal because, of course, again, in the Bible, the early Christians believed that this would happen any time, and we are meant to be people who believe that this still can happen at any time. Jesus talks about it as something that we need to be ready for, and yet we have been waiting 2,000 years, and so some of us tend to get impatient. And so you hear ridiculous things, like certain Christians that believe that if we cause strife in the Middle East, because that's one of the signs of Jesus' second coming, that we can somehow force God's hand and speed things up. That biblically, it says the world will be destroyed before God recreates His kingdom, and so that we somehow could force God's hand if we simply use all the resources in the world and destroy the earth, as if we can somehow force God's hand. See how hard it is to be patient? But we know what our goal is. And when we have our goal in sight, then the best way to be patient is to take steps. At least that's what we learned from the wise men. They wait and they see the star, and then when they do see the star, they start off on their journey. They don't know how long it will take them. They don't have any idea where it's taking them exactly, but they go. And I am a baker. Many of you know this about me. And I have found that this is a really wonderful way to learn patience because there is a goal in mind, this product, right? Bread or some other baked good. So I have my goal in mind, and yet it takes patience. I've become especially aware of that again because I have a toddler in my life, and I like to involve her in the things that I do, and so we'll mix something up, and I'll say we're making bread, right? And in her mind, everything must be immediate. And so, when we've mixed it up, she says, let's eat bread. But there are more steps to be made. Patience is about learning to take those next steps. Sometimes we know exactly what the steps are if we have a recipe, and other times we simply don't know. And this is what I want to say in connection to that. The second coming of Christ, I don't know that there's a recipe for it. We simply have to take steps like the wise men, not always knowing where it will go. The reason I say this is that the second coming of Christ is notoriously hard to pin down. There are things in the Bible that seem to say what it will be like, and yet I tend to lean on Jesus' words, and what He said was, you will have no idea. Even I don't know for sure. And it's a strange thing when the Son of God says, even I don't know for sure. Jesus does give us His own glimpses of what it will be like, but I don't think there's a concrete recipe. And so that's why I think, unlike baking bread, I don't think we can force the second coming of Christ to happen by just taking the right steps. But it doesn't mean that we take no steps at all, because that's not patience. That's just waiting around. And there is a difference between waiting patiently and just waiting around. A really good example as well is I have two friends from seminary, and one of them was a real loner, and another was a very gregarious person. And this gregarious person could tell that the other was a loner, and so she decided she would make this person her friend. And she took steps. After knowing this goal, I want this person to be my friend, she took steps to make this person her friend. And they are indeed friends now. But it took a good year of seminary. This loner friend, when you talk about it now, says, I had no idea why this person kept stopping by my room and talking to me and asking me to do things and inviting me to events. But this one knew what their goal was and was taking steps toward it. I don't know patience very well, as I've told you, but I did learn about one little piece of patience when I was waiting for a child. And you all have asked, because I've mentioned that Megan and I are working toward a second adoption, but I've had people asking, how's that going? It is a process of learning patience. There is, again, a goal in mind to have a child, and there are steps that you can take, but there is a whole lot that is out of your control, and that you simply have to learn to be patiently expectant of. Right now, we're waiting on background checks, and there have to be a background check from every state that you've lived in, and it makes me feel unfortunate that I've lived in so many states. I like to move around because I'm the one they're waiting on, is background checks from a few different states. And the problem is that state governments have had staffing issues like many people have had, and so they are finding that background checks are taking much longer than ever before. So then, how do we develop patience? Well, again, if patience is about knowing the goal and then taking the steps toward it, our goal here could be to have more patience, and then we could take little steps in that direction. We could try being more patient with ourselves and with others. We could read Scripture to see God's patience as a way to invite that into our lives, because patience isn't our natural way of being. We have this saying that practice makes perfect. And I think in this case, I would say today that practice makes patience. All we can do to develop patience is to try it. And so, you could try a simple thing, right? It's all about taking little steps toward that goal. And so the goal is to have more patience than we have right now. And at least for me, that's a good goal, at least today, as I reflected on my morning so far. What if, instead of leaving right now, we just wait 5 minutes and then leave then? See if we can't give ourselves a little patience. We have this other crazy phrase, which is, I have lost my patience, right? Here's what I want to say as people of faith. If you have lost your patience, then you better find it. Because a Christian, in a real sense, never loses their patience, because our patience comes from God, and our patience is God, and we never lose God. In fact, the phrase reveals something about us, because the reality is we don't lose our patience. What we do is give up on it. We turn away from it and instead embrace the fast-paced, self-centered world that wants everything now. And in that same breath that we lose our patience, give up on it, We end up giving up on God in a sense because God is patient. The wise men never gave up and they reached their goal, and we can reach our goals as well. We can see the child lying in a manger at the end of this week, and we can still patiently wait for his second coming. Don't worry about what was or what is. Focus on what will be, what the goal is, and then settle in here and now looking for what the next step is. For us, the goal is the kingdom. Being patient is knowing that moving toward the kingdom is about taking faithful steps and listening to the Spirit and listening for God where God is leading us. It could involve helping someone or healing someone or forgiving someone or feeding someone or loving someone, giving a gift to someone, giving the gifts of peace, gentleness, faithfulness, and patience to the world. These are all ways that we can patiently engage in waiting for the second coming of Christ. And the world needs these gifts. And Jesus brings them to us, and the Spirit makes them thrive in us. And so we can bring them to the world while we wait on God. Amen.